I would like to welcome you all to our today's side event on the impact of Russia's war, not only in the Ukraine, but on a global perspective and on climate justice. My name is Till Groth. I'm from Friends of the Earth Germany, and I'm part of the global wider group of Demand Climate Justice, sorry. I'm very happy to moderate today and to have you as speakers here. And thank you for the invitation to the pavilion. And I'm going to give you a bit of an overview what the situation is about, and then I will let our speakers come to word. On the 24th of February this year, our global narrative changed. Russia's aggressive and illegal invasion in the Ukraine is an act that is condemned by the global community. We have all witnessed this act, some from very close, some from afar by the media. The war has devastating impacts on the Ukraine, and I would like to express my full solidarity with the Ukrainian people. Today, we will be talking about a wider perspective. The war has led to global sanction on Russia's export on fossil fuels, such as gas, oil, and coal. In Europe, whole economies suddenly realized their dependency on a single producer and a single exporting country. This has led to an urge of diversification of the European portfolio of energy imports, and countries are now looking to importing their energies from and their fossil fuels from different regions, and especially Africa and Latin America. We're here on the African continent. We are here as well at the COP27 of the United Nations, a place where the future of our planet shall be negotiated, a place where more delegates, more lobbyists of the fossil fuel industries have gathered than the delegates of the 10 most vulnerable countries combined. And the exploitation of fossil fuels on this continent is nothing new, but it's changing to new momentum. Just to give you a number, since the Paris Agreement in 2016, there have more than 900 fossil fuels projects been reported on this very continent in Africa. This is since the day that the global community decided to keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees. And Germany, as a major emitter, is currently in conversation with various African states to increase the production of natural gas in order to satisfy the energy needs in Central Europe. This is, of course, not only happening here on this continent, but as well in different regions that Tatiana will tell us more about in Latin America. I'm going to take it, it's okay. As we all know for far too long, the extraction and production of fossil fuels is bad for environment. It kills a lot of communities and everybody is affected in a bad manner, but we haven't acted so far. And this extraction locks countries into debts and dependencies. Russia's war does not only have an impact on the Ukraine, it has an impact on a global scale, on energy security, on climate justice. And today we will talk about this. So again, I would like to welcome very warmly our speakers today. And let me introduce to you, starting from in between, Babawale Obayanyu. He is from the Environmental Rights Action, the Friends of the Earth, Nigeria. On my right, this is Tatiana Roa Avendaño. She's from Senza d'Acqua Viva, Friends of the Earth, Colombia. On the far right, there is Eric Nguna, sorry, excuse me. He's a COP27 Actions Coordinator at 350.org, and he's from Kenya. Welcome. And finally, this is Zhevgenia Zadyatsko, Center for Environmental Initiatives, Eco-Action from the Ukraine. Very warm welcome to you, and thank you for joining us today. I would like to start this discussion, the sessions, with the first round of sessions that I will give to you. Then I will give you some time to answer, definitely, every one of you. Afterwards, there will be a second round of questions. There will be final statements, and then there will be place and room for actions as well, if you like, but for questions mostly. Great. So we starting with Baba Wale. Thank you for coming. May I ask you to share a little on the impacts of Russia's war on Nigeria and your country? Did anything change after February? And please as well, could I ask you to share some insights on the current energy situation in Nigeria as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. Can you hear me? I'll try to talk slowly so we could follow. I'm from Nigeria. I work with Environmental Rights Action, the Friends of the Earth Nigeria chapter of the Friends of the Earth International. And I also work with Friends of the Earth Africa. And at this COP, I'm with the Friends of the Earth International team. Talking about the Ukraine war or the Russia invasion on Ukraine. Last week, I learned some things from my sister. I saw her around here. Yeah, she's just there. She gave us a bit of the situation in Ukraine, shedding light on the power situation, on the destruction there. But coming to my own country where I live, what we've seen since the war, I didn't know that the wheat for the bread I eat doesn't come, many of it doesn't come from Nigeria. It's imported from either Russia or Ukraine. But with this war, I got to know because the cost or the price of bread went haywire, and people who used to have bread for either breakfast or whatever meal, many of them could no longer afford to buy bread. Those who used to, the bakers who bake cakes for ceremonies, the prices of their ingredients also went high. So it has a lot of impact on the food sector. And the other thing, I wouldn't know if it's directly tied to the war, but I think it has some direct link. The price of, we call it petrol for the car, and for diesel has also gone haywire. Even if we are a country who produces this product, I'll give you just for the numbers, so you have an idea what it is. We used to buy petrol at 87 Naira, but as I speak now, we buy petrol for as much as 250, 300. So that's the kind of increment we've seen. For diesel, we used to buy diesel for around 180 to 100. Now diesel is as high as 800 Naira for a liter. So it's really, really, really troubling and disturbing for us. So looking at the whole situation also, the energy sector, the government now, because also Russia used to supply a lot of gas to many parts of Europe, but because of the war and the stubbornness of Putin, he's refused to allow gas get to Europe. So Europe now, I remember in Glasgow, one of the striking messages from the European government to African leaders was, do not extract for your gas. If you extract for your gas, you're going to add to the temperature rise. You will not meet the 1.5 target. And many of the African leaders in that space fought against it. But few months down the line, these guys have turned their back, and now they are pushing to African leaders that gas is a transition fuel. Gas is clean. You need to extract your gas so we can get some gas in Europe. And many of the African leaders, sadly, are beginning to dance to the tune of these guys because of the profits that they are thinking they're going to make from it. And now they're telling Nigerians, telling how many other parts, Senegalese, Ugandans, Kenyans, Mozambicans, that see, we need to use this gas to transit from dirty fossil fuel to clean renewable. Gas will serve as our transition fuel to move to the next level that we need to get to. But the reality of it is, to build a gas infrastructure, for example, in my country, would take 10 years. This is 2022. So 10 years will be 2032. Those people who are 40 would have become 50 years. And those who are 50 will become 60. And those who were 10 will be 20. The climate on its own part is not going to wait for you, or wait for me, or wait for our actions. Nature, the way nature works, it's like the computer. It's what you give it, it's going to give back to you. If you give it rubbish, it's going to give you back rubbish. So nature has told us with all the signs and the impacts on climate change that it is time for humans to stop the extraction of fossil fuel if we are to keep living on planet Earth. But as humans, and we've seen in this COP and in other COPs, especially this one, it was called the implementation COP. But now they are shifting goals to the next COP. Somebody said he woke up this morning and checked his Twitter and COP28 was trending. We are still in COP27, but COP28 is trending. Why? They move loss and damage discourse to next year. So how long are we going to continue in this strategy? And we are hoping that the world is going to get better. How? All the industry big shots are right here. All the corporations who are the ones perpetrating this evil are right here. The governments who are dancing to the tune of these corporations are right here. And many of them are in those rooms deciding the fate of community people who are being impacted right now. Before I came to the COP, 27 states in my country of 36 was flooded. Many of the lands submerged in water, farmlands gone, food crops gone, living homes gone. People lost their lives, people lost their properties, and many of them don't even have an inkling on where they are going to get the resource to resuscitate, to come back to reality after the water is gone. So now the big truth about it is the more these guys stay here and keep being inactive or refusing the political will to take action, the more Africa is going to burn and small island nation. So just to give you, that's just a summary of what we are experiencing right now in the country. And I'll stop for now and allow others to speak.
Thank you very much, Baba Wale, for sharing these insights and especially like highlighting various impacts that the war has, but especially the situation that is there. You highlighted the impact on communities, and I would like to continue with you, Tatiana, giving you a question of how the war did impact Colombia, and did you realize any changes? And maybe you can as well describe a bit the current situation in your country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can listen me? Yeah? Okay, it's too noisy. Okay. My name is Tatiana Roa from Colombia. I am part of the environmental organization called Sensata Guaviva, and we are part of Friend of the Air and Oil Watch International. And I would like to talk about what happened in our country. I come from a country that had been at war for more than 6 decades. I know war, and I know how hard it is for the people who suffer it. While some get rich and profit from it, the people suffer despair and pain. In this sense, I would not like to begin without expressing my solidarity. War, as our President Gustavo Petro said last week, takes humanity vital time to avoid extinction. Also, the world should be making the greatest effort to address the climate crisis. We have gone back decades, not only in my country, but in many parts of the world. Coal, gas, and nuclear projects are being revived, while also accelerating the search for hydrocarbons in new frontiers, such as the deep waters of the oceans, or advancing in place of great environmental importance. Also, the current situation should be challenging humanity to reduce the ongoing consumption of fossil fuels that sustains this opulent society, energy projects are revived and greenwashes and the doors are opening with speech and policies that justify it. Now, what happened in my country? In the first place, our country is undergoing an historic political change. For the first time in 200 years of Republican life, a progressive government has come to power. This government, led by President Gustavo Petro and our Vice President Francia Marquez, has made a bold proposal that consists of advancing in the de-escalation of oil extraction through some measures such as the prohibiting fracking and conventional new reservoirs and a new oil exploitation. And two, they stop the advancing coal projects. Remember that Colombia is the largest exporter of coal in Latin America, and its exploitation has left deep wounds in the indigenous Guayú and Afro-descendants communities in La Guajira and El Cesar in the north of our country. This government proposal has been widely questioned by right-wing and extractivist sectors that use argument of war and rising price to object to its proposal for a just energy transition. This narrative promotes the idea that the country must expand its gas and hydrocarbon reserve with fracking projects and other unconventional deposits that could also supply the demand for fertilizers which are imported. In other words, the war has contributed to strengthen the arguments and narrative of those who profit from the fossil fuel business and wish to keep us trapped in this path. The second point I would like to highlight is that in recent months, demand to our coal has increased from European countries, which are supplying Russian gas with coal for their thermal plants. While coal export in recent years had been around 55 million tons, the Colombian Mining Association estimates that in 2022 alone, 65 million tons could be exported. That is around 20% more coal exports. In addition, the effect of the war is reflected in the value of exports, which not only increase in volume, but also in price. The Colombian Mining Association estimates that export could be double the price of the previous year. This, of course, has serious consequences for the people in the north of our country. In La Guajira, the mining frontiers is being expanded, destroying important aquifers vital for the local people. Below Arroyo Bruno are the coal reserves that Swiss multinational Glencore's El Cerrejón company intends to exploit. Further south, the Cañaverales Spring could be raised if a new mine is approved to Spain coal exports. This could put at risk important indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities that use its water to ensure their local livelihoods. It should not be forgotten that dozens of the stream and spring had been disappeared to make way for the large Cerrejón mine. Many villages and community had been destroyed and their population displaced to the mining sunrise, losing their culture and livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. And just a quick information on top. La Guajira is a desert in the north of Colombia, and there is literally no water. Some is there in mountains, and this water, as you just pointed out, is mainly used by a big oil pit mine, and this is threatening the communities you were talking about. Thank you very much for sharing this.
I do some clarification. I think La Guajira is not a desert, it's a dry forest, really. And the water is very important in this because there is only one river, a big river, and a little stream. But it's a discussion because in general, people said in the desert and like the desert we can exploit, but the problem with the water is worse, no, than the other place. Sorry.
So this literally pointed out my ignorance and the ignorance of a lot of people to such ecosystems and communities there. Please excuse and no harm mentioned. And yeah, okay. So let us continue. With us today as well is Eric Njuguna. He's from Kenya. He's with 350.org. And further, you were or are with Fridays for Future as well. And could I ask you to as well share some insights on the Russian impacts on Kenya, and maybe you can find out if there is changes since February, and concentrate on them a bit. Thank you very much.
Testing 1 2. Okay. How I wish I could shush everyone, you know, because we can't actually hear each other. Yeah. It's quite hard. How I wish I could tell everyone to keep quiet so that something is happening here, you know? Okay. I am Eric Njuguna, Youth Climate Justice Organizer from Nairobi, Kenya. I really hope you can hear me. And around February, the Russian invasion in Ukraine started. And with a war or an invasion happening in the global north, especially in Europe, you'd think that it would remain in Europe, but its impacts are far-reaching, including in many global south countries, Kenya included. So the impacts on of the Russian invasion in Ukraine had far-reaching impacts, including in my country, Kenya, where a lot of countries many countries depend on Ukraine for food. And one thing specifically, especially wheat, right? And one thing specifically is that there is an ongoing drought in Kenya, which is putting millions at severe risk of hunger. And coupled with the lack of imports from Ukraine with Ukraine's wheat, right? It means that it's even made having food in Kenya even harder, because lack of Ukrainian imports. Oh my God! Lack of Ukrainian imports means that we have less wheat, and it also increases the prices of food. So with the lack of with the ongoing drought and that ongoing, it exacerbated the hunger crisis in Kenya and the Horn of Africa. This exposed the larger problem with African food systems, which are highly reliant on the global food market for its own food. And it brought a realization that for us to be able to feed Africa, it's not only about feeding Africa is not only an agricultural solution, but also a political one, because our years of neoliberal policies pushed on Africa by neoliberal organizations like the IMF meant that African countries have had to rely on European countries and North American countries for their own food. So when there are shocks in those countries, it means that it also affects our own food systems. And as a result, we need to be able to delocalize Africa's food systems, and not only delocalize, but have autonomy of our own food production. It's quite a challenge because Africa is a net importer of food because of the neoliberal policies pushed upon us for years by organizations like IMF. And we're a net importer of food, despite our own ability to grow our own food independently. We have one of the world's largest, arable lands. And a lot of our food systems now, or African food systems, are oriented around export as opposed to growing food internally. And that is a challenge that when the Russian invasion in Ukraine happened, that means that an important food source was hit, and that was one of the challenges. Another challenge is with oil and gas resources. So with the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, many global North countries decided, you know what, they want to move away from Russian oil. And to meet that deficit, that meant that they moved elsewhere to find oil and gas resources. And elsewhere means other global South countries, including on the African continent, Senegal, and other countries. Now, this is part of a larger problem, and it highlights that African oil and gas resources, like our own food systems, are oriented around European economic growth. And that is why you find that a lot of oil and gas resources constructed on the African continent are not used within the African continent, and are most of them for export. Just the same with our food, and pretty much the rest of our economy, right? Most of them are around European and North American elitist economic growth. And that is what the Russian invasion of Ukraine highlighted. Because now global North countries did what they do best: move to African countries and exploit our own oil and gas resources at a time when Africa has African people lack energy access. 600 million people on the African continent lack access to electricity and basic energy resources that can support the basic requirements to live a life of dignity, So European countries did what they do best: moved to African countries for their own oil and gas resources. And this is at the expense of African people who lack energy access, which is crucial to live a life of dignity on the African continent. And this highlights that the problem which oil and gas has failed to meet energy demands for the African continent. And that is why when I hear someone here at COP specifically saying that, you know what, we need energy, gas for Africa, gas has failed to deliver what it should have delivered for African people. So don't advocate for oil and gas resources here at COP in the name of African people, because that is not the reality on the continent. The reality is African oil and gas resources are going to Europe to meet European energy demands at a time when it is possible and it is proven that we can sustainably shift to renewable energy. But instead, they're using fossil fuel lobby talking points. You know what? That it means that it is for African people when it isn't. And I think the Russian invasion in Ukraine specifically highlighted important issues on the neo-colonial and neoliberal kind of economy that African countries are under. That the colonialism is still alive in the form of neocolonialism, and it just brought out these issues clearer. I do hope that it comes as a wake-up call. There is this saying in Swahili that says fahali wawili wakipigana nyasi huumia. That means that when two bulls fight, it's the grass that gets hurt. That means that when Russia and Ukraine are fighting, other global South countries are also hurting because of the impacts of our own economies and how they're built. One thing specifically that I want to talk about with how European countries moved to oil and quickly moved away to quickly moved away from Russian oil and gas and moved to meeting that deficit by moving coming to Africa, is that moving at such a pace is indeed possible. Like you see, Russia is a key supplier of oil and gas resources for European countries. And they were able to move away from it very quickly. Well, not entirely, but you see at the pace was enormous, more than what the climate crisis has been able to trigger, you know? I wish that that the climate crisis was able to trigger that kind of move away from oil and gas resources, like what geopolitics has, and that shows that geopolitics. What triggered that kind of move is not the climate crisis at a time when it should be. It was geopolitics, and that shows where the priorities of our own leaders are. So, if anything, the Russian invasion in Ukraine was also highlighting or bringing clearer what we've already known for years, that leaders do not care about the people or the climate crisis. Is more of the geopolitics and whether or not Russia is doing this, doing that, what China is doing, that kind of nonsense over prioritizing the climate crisis for people, for planet, and for nature. That is why I join calls to support a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, to support a just transition to renewable energy that prioritizes the people and the planet over profit, over geopolitics. And I hope that that is what this conversation will be about, having seen the impacts or having seen what the Russian invasion of Ukraine highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for sharing strong words. And I would like to now shift over to a different perspective, not from an African continent, not from a Latin American continent, but from the Ukraine itself. Zhevzhinya is with us, and may I ask you to share a bit, maybe not how the war has impacted Ukraine, because this would take 100 million panels we don't have the time for, unfortunately, but maybe like the perspective you would like to share, even go into a justice perspective. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to see so many people. I see that I don't know all of you. So what the topic we actually brought here, it's important. And over this pavilion, we try to show that the war is not only about Ukraine. And luckily, thank you to all panelists who actually support this idea and sharing your experience. You have to talk about climate justice and talk about justice in Ukraine, how it's possible to talk about justice in the country where the war is happening. It's hard and maybe it's even impossible. But how we can talk about climate justice when we have a wars or conflicts, and it's not only about Ukraine. There's so many examples in all around the world when or local conflicts or some wars is happening, and a lot of examples that they depends on the fossil fuel. And we have example here, like what is shown how we depend on the fossil fuel and what losses it can bring. So how we can talk during the COP about Paris Agreement, Paris pledges, when we actually so much depend on the fossil fuel, and we keep supporting actually this independence. War in Ukraine is happening for 8 years, so it didn't start in February. And over the last years, actually, EU increased a lot. For example, they depends on the fossil fuel from Russia. So it showed that Maybe it's not so much visible, but actually the world leaders, the countries keep supporting such activities, like keep supporting the wars, not directly, but still over such activities, they support a lot the wars in other countries too, not only in Ukraine. Over the last months, the whole cities in Ukraine was destroyed. More than 40% of electricity system was destroyed in Ukraine. It just like from 10 of October, just Russia started to hit our electricity system. Coal power plant station, solar panels, wind, and many other like thermal power plant station. They are all, not all of course, but 40% is now destroyed. And it's affecting our energy system. A lot of regions like north, south, east is now at blackout. Sometimes it's like for 1 hour, sometimes it's 4, or it could be 12 hours. So, and our infrastructure depends on electricity. So no medical support, no schools, no kindergarten, no public transport, which is also mostly like some part is electrified. So the life in the city stopped because of this. And also because of Russian actions, 90% of wind power plant station was destroyed and 50% of solar panels. Mostly they've been located in the south of Ukraine. So Russia is targeting our energy system and trying to create another crisis over that we already have in Ukraine. Since the war started, we saw actually it was start to be clear for us that how much this war is connected to the climate crisis. Over the fossil fuel, we understand that 60% of state budget from Russia is coming from the fossil fuel. 45% from the export. So the whole export of fossil fuel is from Russia's supporting this war. So there was a numbers that around 1 billion Russia receiving for the fossil fuel every day, and around this amount they need to keep support the Russian army in Ukraine, like to keep fighting Ukraine. So there is a huge dependence, and over the first 6 months of the war, Russia earned 158 billion of revenue for the fossil fuel. And 54% was exported, paid by EU. So it was around 85 billion. So EU paid for the fossil fuel and keep supported. But we see that there is a changes. And for example, EU started to put embargo. The coal is already implemented. The oil is coming in the end of the year. The gas is not discussed because everybody was afraid how the Europe, including Ukraine, would survive the winter. We see the changes, but is there enough? And plus, we see actually from Colombia, from Kenya and Nigeria, what kind of changes it is and how it goes. Over the last years, Action worked to raise climate ambition in Ukraine. We worked on energy efficiency, renewables, just transition. And now we see that actually we are going in the wrong way. Instead to go actually in a green climate neutral way, we're actually going in opposite and investing in LNGs, in new infrastructure in other regions, exporting it and keep financing it. What we're also afraid that it actually can bring more wars in the world, because like, as I told, like we have a war 8 years, and it started in February in 2014, and new invasion in 24th of February this year. It gives like the whole new scale, the whole new vision. And it can happen again, and we are afraid of this actually, that Russia can come back, or like any other countries can attack, and to actually not give such chance to any other countries, any dictatorship countries. We need to stop be dependent on the fossil fuel. We need to develop inside the countries small scale renewables, and like develop climate neutral country policy, which is going to help us to be independent from any other aggressors. Yeah, and what I wanted to say that's about climate justice also, that Ukraine, we faced the war and now our economy is totally destroyed. And usually who's the first who's facing losses from the climate crisis? It's people who is not well developed. So Ukraine now after Russian invasion, we would be so much affected by a climate crisis compared to any other European countries because of this invasion, because we would not have enough finance. We like even now Europe is facing heat waves, forest fires, and droughts in the river. It's happening same in Ukraine, but we would not have enough resources to actually fight this. And so it's showing over this war again, it's showing that developed countries losing much more than any others, and such wars should be stopped and prevented now after we saw what happened in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Jinya. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing insights and as well linking it to the very moment of that it's actually always those people who are facing crisis in multiple ways that are more heavily affected by a climate crisis. So usually we do a second round of questions going into more like a way of solutions. What are people actually doing on tackling those situations that was described? I would just open the floor a bit to, do you already have a question? Would anybody like to ask a question at this point? There's one already, thank you.
I wonder if regarding Ukraine, is any Russian gas or oil coming through Ukraine for use by other countries or even use internally by Ukraine? And what can the international community do to help stop this war?
That's true that we have a gas pipeline in over the Ukrainian territory, which is going to EU. And after from EU, we actually buy now same gas. So it's again showing us Ukraine, we are like that messages that I gave it here to hopefully to the COP society. We have the same message to Ukrainian government that we need to stop fossil fuel dependence and we need to develop our own independent energy system, which just would not be connected to any fossil fuels in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This perfectly brings us over to a question that I have for Baba Wale. And so if you have other questions, please put them to the end. Could you concern this? Or maybe just put a question here. I think it's all right.
Can you hear me with the mask? No. Is this working? Is it? Oh, okay. It's very hard to hear. Wow. I think it's an open question to all of you and kind of hard. What I find hard is like with what all of you shared and coming from civil society myself, from feminist civil society, I find it hard to bring up all of these topics because whenever we try to engage with policymakers, they say like, oh, it's like naive to like drop out of fossil fuel now. And no, we can't talk about the impacts on like the African continent. We have to focus on Ukraine now first, but then actually people don't listen to Ukrainian civil society as well. So it's kind of hard to make this argument. And then I feel what's connected to that is that policymakers keep playing people against each other. So whenever we try to bring up the topic on like African countries, then they say like, oh, well, but there's poor people in the global north as well. They can't like pay for their energy supply and stuff. So like people, actually civil societies being played against each other, but who's winning in the end is like fossil fuel companies and mostly conservative politicians. So I think it's like a bigger open question of how can we really bring communities together, that we are not played against each other, but that we take all of these intersections yeah, that we are aware of them and support each other, because in the end, it's kind of them against us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This as well links perfectly to a question that I had for you, Babawale, and it is in terms of solution, in terms of ways civil society is challenging this situation that has been described here. And I know that you are in liaison with the Don't Gas Africa campaign, and maybe you can share a bit of how you're working and what is the complete goal of it. And then this will link to others, I'm very sure, linking to your question that you raised before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the wonderful contributions, everyone. Before I go to the Don't Gas Africa campaign issue, I would like us to understand what nature is actually telling us. And we don't seem to be listening to what nature is saying. 2 years ago, it was COVID. COVID came. We all had to sit at home. No one could do what they were doing before. Lifestyle automatically changed. And what nature told us then was, you all just need to make or have the political will and things will change for the better. We didn't listen. And now the Russia invasion happens. We are still not listening. The crisis is beyond fossil fuel alone. Like he said, it's a multi-hydra-headed kind of discussion. One, we're talking about food, and it's all colonial in the ideology, in the mentality, in the process, in the system. They use everything possible. These guys use everything possible to make you feel like you cannot survive on some things. They make you feel like in Africa, they tell you that your food is not good enough. You need my food to survive. And this ideology, they are gradually pushing it into all the system. In Nigeria now, aside the climate crisis we are confronted with now, we are also being confronted with the introduction of GMs into our food system. Now our seeds are getting corrupted. We can no longer have access to clean indigenous seeds we used to have. They are all almost contaminated. You talk to the government. I remember some months ago, they called us environmental terrorists because we talked about them on the national media. So the fight is I don't know the right word to use, but what the call is for all of us, coming back to where you are, we have to keep building this solidarity. All of you who are here, I've heard the perspective from Kenya, I've heard the perspective from Colombia, from Ukraine, from Germany, from England, from civil society groups coming from all of these regions, sharing their perspective, sharing their own challenges. The solution to this problem actually lies with us, the people, grassroots. We need to highlight our differences, and we need to highlight our strengths and begin to put them all together. And that is why we at Don't Gas Africa, Don't Let Africa Burn Coalition, we are seeing the crisis. We know where we are. Nigeria, for example, 62 years of extracting oil. We can't boast of 24 hours of electricity. The people who are extracting don't even care. On an average, we have like 5 oil spills every day. Gas flare, over 178 gas flare stacks all around the Niger Delta, burning day and night. Imagine the amount of greenhouse gas that's been released into the atmosphere on a daily basis. Today, I heard from a comrade from in Niger Delta community that from 3 months now, from October to August, September, October, they've lost 3 women who just died from strange ailments. And this goes on and on. So for us, we have seen the impact, and we know that this government of ours cannot be trusted. If you have extracted for 62 years and there's nothing to show for it, how will you make the change happen in 10 years? So we've written to the African Union, because the African Union came with a position, or they drafted a position that they are coming here to demand that they want the gas to be extracted, and that Africa cannot transit without coal, without fossil fuels, without gas. But we have written to them and we've made our positions known to them that, see, the impact affects all of us on different levels. If it's 1.5 in Europe, it is 2.8 in Africa. If it's 2.0 in Europe, it's 4.8 in Africa. And so the beauty of all of this, or the funny part of it, is Nigeria, for example, in the last few months, we've had over 8,000 medical doctors migrate out of Nigeria, all heading towards UK and Canada. This migration is not going to stop because we've always been told that the grass is greener on the other side. So everybody wants to go to where the grass is greener. So now you're going to be complaining of population, like in UK, they started making a noise that Nigerians are coming, too many Nigerians are coming into the United Kingdom, but the governments are doing what is making people leave Nigeria to come. So we need to start tying all of these dots. Everything is interconnected. The war in Ukraine right now, I can imagine how indebted Ukraine is. After the war, they have to pay the debt for the weapons that were given to them to fight this war. That one is on its side. We're not talking about that one yet. They need money to rebuild. Where's the money going to come from? One government, one of these financial institutions is going to offer them some loan that's going to keep them further impoverished. So the fight is on. So that's why we are telling African leaders, guys, don't do this to us. Don't do this to yourself. Because I think it's high time also they begin to see that they are not exonerated. No matter how far you go, they can't call me an American. They're going to call me an African American. They can't call me a European. They're going to call me an African Europe. So first, before anything, I'm called an African. You can't take that off me. You can't take that off yourself. You are first an African before you become any other thing. So the earlier our leaders begin to realize that it is time to act and think about the people that they are serving, the better for us. That is why don't gas Africa, don't let Africa burn. This is our stand. We are united. We are over 20 different civil society organizations in that body who are demanding that gas should not be extracted. We have met the EU, we've met ECOWAS, we've met all the African leaders, as many as we can meet, and we're still going to meet them. We've written petitions. We had a petition with over 500 signatures on it. We sent to the African Union. We've taken to the ECOWAS Parliament. We are not stopping. We don't want them to extract for gas because we know the gas is not for use on the continent. It's all meant for export. The food that is produced on the continent is not meant to feed the people on the continent. It's meant for export. And for how long are we going to continue in this colonial mindset? So for the people on the other side, when you are making your campaigns, you also need to see how this is connected. For example, Germany is saying they want to go extract for gas in Senegal, but my colleagues in Germany are already making the financial institution, the citizens to realize that, guys, what our government is going to do in Senegal is going to impact on us here in Germany. We might have the energy, but our brothers on the other side are going to be impacted. So we need to start building this connection. We need to continue building this connection. And the more we do it, the more we're going to get the victory. Together we stand. The way they are trying to be together in that room because of the money, the better for. So we should gather our strengths together, unite together, and keep fighting until we get. And the last thing we should be careful about. Yes, we all want renewable energy, and our demands to African leaders is demand for this technology to be transferred. Because the more Africans know how to produce these materials for themselves the way they want it, the safer for us. If we just keep insisting on renewable energy, we are still going to go back to the same model. They produce and make us buy at their own cost. So the earlier we realize that we need to begin to ask for this technology to be transferred, open up the doors for research to happen, for research to happen, that Africans begin to develop these things by themselves, for themselves, the way they want it, the safer it's going to be for Africa. So as we are campaigning for this, we should also be thinking about this side. And lastly, all the solutions they are bringing forth, this is just as simple as any other thing. But somehow we have been wired in a way in the world that if the solution is not technical, if the solution is not in a volume of a book, it's not real. The solution is simple. Leave the oil in the soil. You cannot mop a wet room with a tap flowing. Shut the tap and mop the room. I heard an adage this morning that a child that burns the house of his father would inherit the ashes of the building. So if the world wants to have a world where we can live in, it is time we stop burning our house. Else we are going to inherit ashes. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much. Hola, hola. Sí, funciona. Thank you very much, Wale, and strong words. Thank you. Tatiana, Wale was talking about strengthening the community, strengthening the people, stand together. And you've been doing this for a long time now. And I'm always impressed by you. And could you share a bit, following Wale, on your fight for climate justice in Colombia and your fight against the coal pit in the north, and maybe what are the challenges to the movement in Colombia at this point? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Till. Colombia is a country with enormous wealth in the struggle for the environmental justice. Broad coalition and articulation alliance of diverse social sectors, including the labor movements, had been working over the last decade for the moratorium of the extractive projects, a ban of fracking and unconventional oil and gas fields, and a just energy transition. For instance, the Alliance Against Fracking, or Alianza Colombia Libre de Fracking, have stopped the fracking during more than 10 years, but it's fighting. It's fighting is with protests, with mobilization, with it's fighting. Yeah, if you don't fighting, you don't find that. No, it's not a politics voluntarily stop the fracking. No, it's our fighting. And this struggle continues in Colombia, even as such a high cost in human lives. Colombia is the most dangerous country, not only for the environmental activists, but for other social fighters, including trade unions and journalists. And we have many challenges. And one of them is to build solid arguments to counter the hegemonic narrative that promote extractivism and the fossil fuels. And it's also necessary to build a solid proposal. Recently, Sensata Guaviva, together with other social organizations and movements, launched this document, a planned reduction in fossil fuel dependence in Colombia, working towards cultural shift and participatory demand science management. This paper contains 5 points to break the economy and energy dependence on fossil fuels. However, this is not enough. It's necessary to continue working in this perspective and to deepen the proposal even more. In addition, it's necessary to build a great social force that works for social and climate justice. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Tatiana. Eric, I know your part as 350.org. You are fighting against fossil fuels for a longer time. How do you imagine a just transition, you yourself and your organization, to a better future?
Testing. All right. In my view, a just transition starts with stopping all new oil and gas exploration and construction of new infrastructure. That is something that is still happening and will not bring us any closer to limiting a global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. I think the UN is clear that to be able to limit a global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, we need to stop the construction of new oil and gas infrastructure, and that is clear. Secondly, we need to phase out all existing oil and gas infrastructure. for a just transition to happen and while phasing out, we need to consider the rights of workers, including those who work in the fossil fuel industry, because I believe they deserve a just transition too, because climate justice is workers' justice, and we need to support their livelihoods too. I think that whilst we're talking about a just transition and moving to renewable energy, we need to think about climate justice as a systemic change, because the very system that brought us into the climate crisis is not the very system that is going to bring us out of it. And whilst we're talking about moving to a world of renewable energy, if we do not put capitalism into our analysis, then our fantasy world will be rooted in the blood of Congolese people from Congo who are mining these important minerals for renewable energy. That is why we need to put capitalism in our analysis. And that is why I said that the very system that brought us into the climate crisis is not the same one that is going to lead us out of it. We need to think about it as a systemic change. Otherwise, just moving to renewable energy, we can move to renewable energy, but replicate the same unjust exploitative systems that took us into the climate crisis in the first place. And that is why, as I said, climate justice is workers' justice. What is going on in the DRC right now? We see children involved in the mines, child labor. UNICEF puts it at 40,000 children involved in mining of these important minerals like cobalt and lithium in the DRC. At the same time, you find that there is these workers are underpaid, exploited, paid way lower than the minimum wage by multinational companies. And that is why we need to put capitalism in our analysis of moving in towards a renewable energy and dismantle these systems that brought us into the climate crisis in the first place. So step one, stopping all new oil and gas exploration. 2, phasing out existing fossil fuel infrastructure and moving to renewable energy. And while we move to renewable energy, I think a challenge for Africa is only 2% of global investments in renewable energy are in Africa, just 2%. And that highlights how Africa is highly underfunded. And for us to achieve climate justice, we need finance for global South countries. We need finance, and finance in the form of grants, not debt-creating forms of finance that exacerbates the ongoing debt crisis on the African continent. We need finance, and in the form of grants, because climate justice is debt justice, and that we need to realize that. While moving to renewable energy, I think one challenge is that we also need to make these investments or renewable energy accessible, especially to lower income communities, because at the moment, I think it is, I reckon that sustainability is expensive. Sustainability can be expensive and is a privilege. And that is why we need to make sure that we are making cheap, sustainable choices cheaper. And that means that we create policies that make these resources cheaper for economically disadvantaged communities. So my world of how a just transition would look like is a world where workers' rights are protected, where it is accessible to lower income communities. It is a world where, whilst we create renewable energy, it is not exploitative to communities, and it is accessible to everyone, as opposed to just benefiting a few shareholders in some fossil fuel companies, or some few shareholders at the expense of the global majority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Again, strong words, and I think I could, even as a somewhat neutral person here, sign all of this. Thank you. Bring in the transformation point and bringing the building point up to this schedule here. Zhenya, I would like to ask you something about how do you imagine the reconstruction of your country to happen? And what would a climate just and a better future look like?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's one of the challenges. Can you hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. It's one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face. First, it's stop the war, and of course, how we're going to rebuild Ukraine. And of course, it's yeah. Thank you. It's look like in the beginning of the war, my colleague in Action, we like been shook. I don't know, we lost our balance and we didn't know what should we do. Like we worked before with climate change, climate policy, renewables, just transition, coal regions occupied. Who is going to talk about renewables when our renewable energy resources is destroyed? How we're going to talk about climate change or climate policy when we're not safe, we are like really surviving and we're fighting for our lives. But after some time, after a few months, we actually back to that all that we worked before, it's still relevant. We need to keep going and do the same work, and it would be applicable and help us to stop the war and help us to rebuild Ukraine and after the war is stopped. And actually rebuilding process is happening now. There is a lot of discussions, a lot of challenges and the ways we're looking for how we're going to, what are the ways, how we can do it. And probably we would not finish it soon, but it's right time to do it because unfortunately we can't wait until the war would stop, which is somebody is saying okay, how we can discuss the rebuilding of Ukraine if the war is still going. But when the war is stopped, so we actually need to stop act. We need to stop rebuild, and we can't lose this time for discussions and looking for the way. So it's the right time to actually find the right way. And civil society now a lot engaged, trying to be engaged in all this rebuilding process, all these discussions. So how we see it, of course, it's to reach the goal of climate neutral until at least in 2050. We need to stop dependence on our fossil fuels, export, and we have also local gas resources and coal, but we also need to stop them and actually focus, put our priority in energy efficiency, renewables. How we can reach this? It's of course open process, so it should be a transparent process, engaged with all stakeholders at different levels. It's national, it's local level, so it shouldn't be only discussed at the Ukrainian parliament or only by President of Ukraine. It should be engaged with all levels, and actually 6 million, if I'm right, people who left Ukraine. So and of course, Ukrainian government is expected that all these people is coming back. But how they're going to come back if they're now not engaged in the rebuilding process? How to ensure that actually they see their future in this country and they wanted to come back. So one of the instrument now engage them in the rebuilding process and the discussion, so they would see their purpose, they would see the future. So hopefully we are going to have this transparent process. And last week there was a presentation of the report on how Russian invasion affect the climate change. And because of the invasion, direct emission was around 36 million tons CO2 equivalent. And for rebuilding the whole infrastructure, and as I mentioned, the whole cities is destroyed. And for example, in Mariupol, where the population is around 100,000 people, it's totally destroyed. So all these people lost their homes, they lost kindergarten, schools, hospitals, transport, everything. And it's not only Mariupol, we have the same city in Izium and Kharkiv region, in Kyiv, Irpin. You probably heard all of these names. So there is like a huge amount of infrastructure that we need to rebuild, and the amount for of the emission that can be produced for rebuilding is around 50 million ton CO2 equivalent, like in the future. So when we're going to start to rebuild, and to rebuild, we need to actually use new technologies, new standards to make it once efficient and not to come back in the future to this, and plus like to reduce as much as we can emission to not to have so much impact on the climate change in the future from the perspective of rebuilding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good point. So we can see there's a lot of dependency from outwards in different countries, and they are different dependencies definitely, but they have devastating impacts. And now we're here at this climate negotiations. Everybody's facing different threats, but they're all combined. And I would give you the floor for some last words you would like address to these negotiations. And afterwards, if you'd like to ask some questions, please do so. Tatiana, maybe you would start.
Okay, I would like to say first, thank you for the invitation. And second point, I would like to give two ideas to finish. I think in the face of war, the only way forward is the construction of peace, and society as a whole must work in this perspective. To build the peace is the most important thing. And in the face of the climate crisis, the most urgent way forward is leave the oil on the ground and the coal in the hole, as the Oil Watch slogan said. And I think European society need to take conscience of its responsibility of the consumption under our realities. And this is not time for a hesitation, it's a time for action. Thank you.
I think my elder has said everything that we should say. The message is clear. We've all said it right. This is not a time for talk shop. It's not a time for trade fair. It's a time for action. If we want to come back here in 5 years and clap our hands at the success we have achieved to keep the climate at a safe level, action must be taken now. So the message to the Global North is that they should remember they have a historical debt to pay, and no matter how long they run, they will pay that debt one day. The earlier they pay, the better. And for African leaders, it is time to look inwards. Stop coming to spaces like this with your cap in hand, begging as if you are a beggar. Put on your cap, get into the community. The solution for the crisis is within us. We have the solution. The community people have enormous knowledge embedded in their spaces. Let us consult the people, get their knowledge. Energy shouldn't be for profit. It should be for the common good of the people. The people should determine the form of energy they need, how they need it, where they need it, and when they need it. And they should not be determined, or they should not be told what form of energy they need. They should be the ones to lead in determining what form of energy they need. And the people have said, we don't want further extraction of oil from our continent. It is time to look inwards and get a solution from within us. They have also demanded that the technology required to transit should be supported with all forms of grants and not loans. All forms of, not loans. We don't want loans that will keep us impoverished. The governments of the North should support research, indigenous research, and create finance available to make these industries possible to happen within the continent. Like my brother has said, and we are seeing it already, they are changing their names from oil companies to energy companies. with the same capitalist ideology. We cannot change the system with that same mindset. If we want a new system, we have to think about the system that considers the people, that is people-centered, that is people-led, and is people-owned. The more we waste time, the more Africa we born. The time to act is now.
Thank you. Since we are at COP, I think it's important, and I'm expected that during the next last days of COP, there would be really ambition, pledges, actions put on the paper and would be proved with the actions, because now we had a lot of discussions, a lot of words, but lack of real actions. So the war in Ukraine showed a lot the impacts, what kind of impact can bring the fossil fuel, and I don't want to see it not in Ukraine, not in any other countries. So we need to stop it, and the COP is a huge platform that can actually change, break this wall. And luckily it can happen at this COP, and in the future we will be free and climate neutral. Thank you.
I think.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? All right. My message to global North leaders would be that it's time to support the people. A lot of having been here at COP27, I have realized that most of these spaces are not built for the people. Here at COP27, for instance, 600 delegates, literally 600 delegates are from the fossil fuel industry. That's bigger than delegations of the least, some of the least developed countries who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. And the thing with having the fossil fuel industry in such spaces is that they're here to advance their own interests. And you know, you cannot, in a convention to kill malaria, you don't bring the mosquitoes, you know? Yeah, because mosquitoes don't wanna, they can't talk about killing themselves. And that is the challenge with having spaces where it's only corporates pushing their own agendas and world leaders moving around pushing their own geopolitics and being slow to take action. And that is why I've realized that spaces like COP will not save us. This is the 27th failed opportunity to tackle the climate crisis, COP27. We have had 27 opportunities to solve the climate crisis. And if those 27 opportunities would have been used properly, then we wouldn't have called the climate crisis a crisis in the first place. And right now, we have a goal to limit global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. But I do think that even 1.5 degrees is a political compromise, because the impacts of the climate crisis that we are facing right now is with just 1.2 degrees. So you can imagine what impact 1.5 degrees will have on our own communities in the global south, who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, but have the least role in causing this crisis and are not even being supported because climate finance to support adaptation and mitigation is not being delivered. And we're now at a point where it's beyond adaptation. And that is why African civil society are here calling for loss and damage finance, because we're at a point where we can no longer adapt to the climate crisis. And we also need loss and damage finance to support communities who are facing loss and damage as a result of the climate crisis, like in Kenya, where there is a climate-induced drought, which is putting millions at severe risk of hunger. People are dying, livestock are dying in a community who depend on livestock for their own livelihood. And that is why I think it is about time we realize that world leaders and such spaces like COP are not meant for the people. And change cannot happen within 2 weeks of a conference, because for us to achieve climate justice, we need a systemic transformation. And that takes longer than just 2 weeks of a conference. We need justice delivered to our African people. And so far, the African COP, it has proven to just have been a location change and not an opportunity for climate justice to have been delivered for the African people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Does anybody of you have a question he, she, they want to raise? So I don't see any. And with your last words, Eric, I'm closing the session right now. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, ideas, and strong words. And I'm very much hoping to see you around, and you as well. And wish you all a very productive day. And a good one. Bye.